A star. Star dot star. Dot star.
A
That's fine.
what?
Yeah. Now period. No star. Now I'll tell you what we're doing here. No star.
No star? No space?
Okay. What this is doing is saying, I will take any. I want you to list any file that has an A in it, no matter what, as long as it starts with an A, and then anything in that file, and any extension. It doesn't have to be a bat file, it can be a system file or anything. So any file in this whole thing that has an A at the very first leading character, then it's going to print that file when you hit return. Now there may be a system file, but we know that one of them is going to be called auto, so it will find at least one.
So we'll see if it's space.
There's three. There's the auto that we were looking for. There's an ANSI, sys, a pen com, a sign com, an attributes com, or a tribute com. Okay, so that's what we know. And we know when they were written, what time of day it was written, how many characters were involved. Now, the executable files, if you say type, you'll get a bunch of garbage, of actual code, and not meant to be read. While auto is a, as you saw here, is actually an edited file written. Okay?
Now, what you tell me to do anytime I direct is space after direct.
The hour
Always
space.
And then my
Then
command.
file name or wildcards or whatever you want. If you want everyone, you can do a dir star dot star, and then look for everything. Star being wildcard anything to anything, or you can say wildcard anything with an extension of com or with whatever extension it is that you want. Yeah, a lot of people will take like this. If this is actual text, they'll call the extension txt for text, so that when you look at it, you'll know that this is a system file. That's an executable command file, and that's an execution file. These are all meaning object code, and the next one being text would mean, hey, that's text code, so that you as a person might know what it's meant for, so you can what's going on. So now, if you hit,
Interrupt. These files are on the hard disk.
that's correct. They're on the C drive.
Right. And did you put them on there?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
And I just renamed it.
And you just renamed it. I put the others on there from when it first came up. There was no files in there, and I even had to format the hard disk. Remember, when you first get a brand new disk, including the one that you get shipped in there, it is a piece of magnetic space that's never been sectored before. So the very first thing is that I had to go in and sector this thing so it divided up the memory so that it could find the 30 megs. Okay. Then I could have stopped right there, and that's what you normally would do, and say, okay, here, what do you want? Because I can erase it too. I can just go to erase, or I can reformat it. It'll all be just like it was. I can totally blow it away. But
So when you're talking about formatting, you're talking about, see, this is where she said some experience that I have with directories and things. You're talking about what you did when this thing came out of the box. You took the hard disk,
installed it, put it in
okay,
physically.
physically. Then you formatted it.
Yes.
Or you divided it into sectors, or
Yes.
that's part of
I did.
formatting.
No.
That
Two
is
different steps.
formatting.
There's two steps. One, the sectoring is formatting, but you also have to divide it up in cylinders and also have to tell it what directory it is. How much is DOS? How much is going to be used for what type of function? So it was like assigning a drive. You had to assign it to a drive. But then after you assign it to the drive, then you also have to format it and build it in sectors. So there's
Yeah.
actually two phases to it.
All right. When you could give me a little background on that, it would help me, I think, understand better. You divided it into how many sectors?
Well,
You could do it any number you wanted to?
well, I didn't count them because I didn't want to have to count all the different sectors, but I did tell it that I wanted it to head to skip some places because I knew it would make the access time on the disk faster if I picked certain numbers for it. Well, let me show you on this thing. You can just sit right
And
there.
then a hard disk is
Hard different is plainly different than anything else. That's exactly right. Let's see, where's that big pencil?
I've never formatted a hard disk.
Here it is. Now that's a difference. It is a major difference than a floppy. What you have is a big cylinder going around at a time, and it's fast. It's very, very fast. So therefore, and it's got so much density. It's so packed in there, the hard disk is, that there's a mechanical piece that comes out to read the tracks. They're invisible, but they are magnetic tracks where the head goes in and out, where you'll find little circles like rings of a tree, and it will find the information in these different tracks as it spins. So the head will go out, but when you first buy one from the store, it's just all magnetic, never been written on before. These tracks are invisible. The tracks aren't there. Nothing's there. So the very first thing you have to do is tell it the two things. Number one, if I'm writing a file, when they first did this years ago, they said, we'll just start right here to write a file, and we'd end right here to write the rest of the file. So all your data would fall in within this range right here, right? Well, that was a problem, because of the way that things are written, this disk is spinning, and if you tell it to go find something, you have to wait. Say that you had your disk right about here when the file came in. If it couldn't read, and if it didn't have the time wasn't right, it can't get all this memory in here on that one turn very easily. So what they did, they said, hey, rather than try to get it into here and here because of the speed, we'll take a little section here, put a little more here, put a little, and we'll divide it up maybe into 3 sections so that part of your file is written here, here, and here. So it doesn't have to, it won't be all continuous on one piece, but it knows where it is. It knows how far to go before it finds another section. Okay. That makes the actual disk speed faster when you're trying to copy and jump between sectors, because it can read part of your file on part of a turn. It doesn't have to wait until the whole revolution is
The
done.
data's not really all together on the disk.
That's correct. It is not. To you, it may feel that way. It may look that way, but technically, it's not. And it doesn't really matter to you, but it does matter to how fast this disk works. The more the more megs. This is a 30 meg. The bigger the disk capacity, the slower the disk is really at accessing the data, because it's now more dense in here. It's going at a real rapid rate, but it's so dense that it cannot necessarily read it all at one time. So within this one pass, it may take 2 or 3 passes to run. If it takes 2 or 3 passes to run, you got to wait until this thing hits 1, 2, 3, 4. While if it was separated here, 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 and here, it might get it all in one pass, because it has a little time between each one of them to get the data into its position. So they divide it up into the cylinders are divided up first, and the tracks are done. Then what they do, you format it, and this is what you do just like a floppy disk. What it does, it then, after you know the head cylinders, how many heads that this thing thinks that it has, then it divides it up into sectors like this. Okay? And at that time, the sectors is what you normally read as a boundary. I'm going to say this because it almost like it contradicts the other part that I just said with the sector, but the sectoring tells you each one of these has a label on it, so it knows what sector you're in. When you write to a part of a sector with a boundary here, and depending on these sectors, how many there are, this determines how many bytes you'll get in each one of the sectors, basically. The heads,
Well, it fills up the sector, then it
Yes.
goes to another.
yes, correct. That's correct. But say that it filled up all these sectors in a row. Let's see if I can do that. I don't have a really good explanation. I may have to come back.
Well,
to that,
do we
but
really need
basically-
to know that, though?
Not really.
But that's what formatting does.
Yes, format takes the memory that's completely
A blank disk?
blank disk. Never been doing. We'll format one. That's the reason why I got this disk here. And it actually partitions it off into sectors. Okay. And the other thing that the one I was telling you to do before about the heads and all, it has to do with what do you label this whole disk as? Can you sector it off? And here's what it really is. It's saying, can I allocate this part of the disk here as a totally different operating system, so that this is allocated something different than the rest of it is. In other words, you can write to these sectors, but you won't ever have anything written here. And you can divide this up as like, this disk can actually look like 2 disks. This could look like C disk, and the rest of it could be Z disk.
You can't
You
write
could.
to certain
you could tell it that you want to divide this big disk up into smaller disks. If you do, then you have to tell it how you're going to do that before you format it. Formatting then formats these within the disk. I'm getting onto it now because see, when you do a format formats the disk, and if you call this, if you petition first off and say I want to take this disk, this one platter, make it 2 disks, even though it's not, then the very first thing you do, you have to tell it which half is what, which one. Is it this one belongs to this one, or this? Who's the owner? Is this the owner or this the owner? To what portion of it? Then after it has done that, then you got to format those portions into sectors so that it can find the data for that disk.
Now, Terry, it won't write over a sector, unless it's all filled, or will it then?
Oh,
If you fill up a floppy disk, say, and will it write over a sector, it's got nothing on it?
No, it's marked. If it's marked, it just says it's full. It
It'll
won't.
just tell you it's full.
Yeah, it says when it gets free and you try to copy more into it, it says, hey, I looked at this table and I know how much I've got used up and it's all used. I can't write anymore. And you don't have to worry about that. It takes care of all that with the software inside it.
Well, maybe you could do something, I don't know how long would it take to go through, now see, she understands probably what we're doing here, but I don't, okay? Because I understand we turn the machine on, and all of a sudden, see, we come down here to a hard disk, which I thought would have had nothing on it, okay?
It could. I can wipe it out. I can say just erase it.
All right, but what I'm saying is we got into this disk that had something on it, how did it get on there? You know, are we gonna need to know that, and can we go in that order? And
Sure.
then maybe I'll understand this.
Well, we'll create a RAM disk and we'll do the same thing we did if it was the other. Go to the D drive. There is no D drive, right? So it's a pseudo D drive. In this thing, there is a piece of software when it's coming through this same thing with the auto exec to execute it. There's also a file in there that says RAM disk. And that is where this software, it's a special piece of software, says that, hey, I'm going to create this out of memory, a certain size that's going to act like a disk that's really the pseudo disk. It just so happens that the way I did yours, normally when you get one or somebody sells it to you, the disk is formatted usually, so that you don't have to worry about it. We had to do this one, but I see that anytime we sell one, we'll format it before we even get it out in the field. There's no use. We need to have it formatted unless there's somebody says that if they don't want it formatted. We need to have at least formatted and made sure everything was right with it. Maybe not have any files on it and let you do the rest of it, but at least have it formatted to this thing so we can put the files on it. Now, there's one other thing here is that it had RAM disk. To make RAM disk operate, there's a file sequence, just like I told it to do this file. I can also tell it to go out and create this disk, which I did in that thing called a different file. It's called config.sys. If you look under it, do a dir on star.sys. Just type dir space star.sys. .sys. You got a dot in there? See, I'm looking for any of them that have an extension of sys, like the pins there. I want all those. I want all the system disks. See, now these are system. These are things that the system, when it comes up through the checking, that it goes out and pulls this information from as a system. One of them is, see the RAM drive that says sys, and config.sys. Config.sys, you'll find, is also used for the user. The user decides what he wants his system to look like. So he puts the information in config.sys, and you'll find in your book what all the options are. But it will tell you how you want this system to come up. For example, if I didn't do it, I didn't have to put in there that you wanted a RAM drive. So therefore, if I don't put that command in config.sys, you don't get a RAM drive unless you turn around and put it in later. Okay? So that means that if you look and do a type again, type out what's in config.sys.
Well, let me, before you do that, I'm lost, okay?
Okay?
And I'll be lost the rest of the time
Okay.
if we continue to, if I'm lost, I'm lost.
Okay. Let's go back.